In this episode of SENSimilla, we'll be chatting with Sam Houston, the co-founder and CEO of Cannabis, a cannabis-friendly social media platform that has filled a huge hole for the community's presence online. Taking full advantage of the strict terms of service and content restrictions that the big dogs like Instagram and Facebook enforce without abandon, and welcoming the users blacklisted by these platforms, Cannabis has grown their user base to nearly 120,000 in the near 2.5 years since launching. Find us on there at Cannabis. Sam Houston, welcome. Thanks for taking the time to talk to me today.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I'm excited to talk to you.
It's I really love talking to tech people. You know, tech people, like there's wherever in that spectrum of tech entrepreneur.
Yeah.
I don't get to do it too much in the cannabis space, but it's always fun because I feel even more aligned, like we're fraternity brothers, like, yeah, like the nerds, we're doing it finally.
Yeah.
not that we've had any like issues with it, but it's always good to talk to people trying to do things on the tech side of things.
Sure.
So important things first. Okay. You're from Ohio.
Yeah, that's where I was born and raised, and then moved out, I guess, when I was about 20.
Can you explain something to me?
Sure.
And the New England listeners listening or watching.
Okay.
Chili and spaghetti. What's the deal, Sam Houston? Give it to me here.
That's more of like a Southern Ohio thing. So it's like a Cincinnati. Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, it's so funny that, growing up, I grew up in Central Ohio, like near Columbus. So, instead of that, kind of like everything revolved around the Ohio State Buckeyes, was kind of like the center of the universe.
Yeah.
Where I grew up. So
we've all got our weird things where we grow up, and then you go to college or whatever, and you're like, oh, you don't have chili and spaghetti? Like what? Where am I?
Yeah.
I totally get that. Growing up in New England, it's very, in its own bubble. And then I went to school in upstate New York, which is also a bubble, but a different one.
Yeah.
And
totally.
was just blown away. And I was like, oh, people didn't grow up sailing or whatever.
Yeah, there's a lot of different niches, especially in the different colleges and whatever in New England. So
Absolutely.
So I moved from Ohio to Boston. I dropped out of college. I was going to school in Northern Ohio, dropped out of college to work at an internet startup in 2008. So moved up there and lived in Cambridge area for about 2 years.
You're following the quintessential tech founder path, which is go to school, maybe in Boston, drop the fuck out, go to, do something else. And I actually really admire that because, and not that I think that college has a ton of value for multiple reasons. However, to some people, it can be sort of just a layover, right? Just between high school and the next stage of life. But being able to recognize that while you're in it, I think is pretty impressive, knowing that like, this isn't my thing.
Well, yeah, I guess for me, it was like, so, for me, I was passionate about, and that startup that I ended up working at was in the video game industry. So I was really passionate about working in the video game industry and like figuring out how to do that. And that wasn't, definitely wasn't happening in Ohio, especially, 13 years ago or whatever this would have been. So it just made sense that I needed to get out. And this opportunity happened because I was running fan sites and like internet radio stations for video gamers, kind of like what Twitch is today, but like audio instead. So I was doing that, and that kind of got me introduced to, some companies and whatnot. And then I ended up moving out to Boston and worked in the video game industry for a few years. At the time, like Boston's video game community kind of revolved around the Rock Band game had just came out. And the Studio Harmonix is right there on Mass Ave in Cambridge.
Right.
And so we were right there. And so that was a really cool experience. And then, but the company, the startup, ended up going out of business at the end of 2009. it was just not a good time to be a startup in the middle of like the financial crisis, and also trying to be a like consumer focused social network based in Boston in 2008 was not a great idea, because everything was happening in San Francisco. That was the time when Facebook was just starting to really blow up.
Yep.
So I ended up moving out to San Francisco at the very, very beginning of 2010. And I've lived out in the San Francisco Bay Area for the last 11 years.
Okay, last food question, I promise. Unless you have any for me about maple syrup or Ben and Jerry's. My last one is I've only been to San Francisco once, and it was for an event at Square, the Square unboxing event.
Yeah.
And I went to a Korean barbecue place called Yakinique. Have you been?
I don't think I have.
No. We're stopping the podcast. Let me pause it. Go.
I'll have to Google that. Yeah.
Oh my God, it's amazing. Cool. So I assume I'm a little bit older than you. My internet days were I think we were probably the first in my town to have a modem, and it was one of those ones that like you would put your landline receiver into a cradle, right? And it would ring. And my brother and we would like do prank phone calls through the router, right? We'd like call somebody and do like it would do that thing, like before anybody knew what that noise was. So like I can remember, I can sort of recall stages of my life against sort of technological booms, that being the first one. And like kind of then, the first iMac, we had one, we had that first iMac, we had it. And I can remember when we got that AOL disc in the mail. And then I figured out what chat rooms are and all these things to MySpace. And I was in a band. So figuring out how to like market yourself through MySpace, all these things. I'm curious on your perspective on just like the evolution of social media, because, it's impacted you even more. Like you're probably closer to a digital native than I am.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so my career, what I do to pay, my bills is community management. So I've been building online communities and paying attention to them for, professionally now for 12, 13 years, but as a participant for a long time. Right. And so, I went through everything from like IRC chat channels and forums where you were like especially nerdy. IRC was kind of like the super nerdy version of the chat rooms that you had on AOL or something. Right. And then we had forums, and then in 2007, 2008, Twitter was starting to really kind of blow up, and that's actually how I first really made my mark in my career, was on Twitter. Just being really early on Twitter with respect to the video game industry, and I
understanding it.
Yeah. And it's one of those things that would like, you couldn't do again, but I wrote a blog post that was a list of like every video game company and developer or whatever that I knew of that was on Twitter. And I just published a blog post on my blog. And like within 2 days, it was on TV. It was literally on G4 TV, like on their little ticker. It was like gameindustrytweet.com, like if you want to find people on Twitter. And it was just like, it got all this coverage because no one else had like this list of people that were on Twitter. And my whole point at the time was, look, companies, you can listen to what your audience is talking about on the internet right now. Like, we couldn't really do that at the time. And so that was really exciting. Yeah. And then connect across, just, we take all these things for granted now, but, being able to connect with people beyond like, fame or email barrier, spam filters or whatever, just being able to like tweet at people, that was really big. And so, I really dove into Twitter and, had been involved in various social medias. I've worked at different social media companies. I've had kind of a lot of experience through all that. And now, running my own social network, basically, that's kind of informed a bit on how I approach like the community and how I've approached thus far, how to monetize it or not monetize it, basically,
Right.
because I want to try to steer away from some of the things that you see. A lot of these bigger social networks or whatever, they start out, you provide this like great platform for a community, and eventually you have to like turn it into a giant money making machine, and
You're
that's
at, you're
where like things
you're
kind of get lost.
you're
Yeah,
still at the behest, or you're ultimately at the
yeah,
behest of advertiser dollars, right?
yeah, yeah, totally. So that's um yeah, but it's been like you were saying, it's changed a lot over the last 20 something years, and it's been
Yeah,
interesting to
absolutely.
watch. Yeah.
I'm curious. So like I'm kind of curious, like at what point, okay, so you drop out of college in Boston. You're working for a video game company almost immediately. Right. At what point do you know that there is, I mean, I suppose you can just look back just a few years and understand that, you know, individuals were able to monetize things like MySpace, not MySpace so much, but individuals were. But how did you have the foresight to kind of see that, like, um, not only was there a future in it, but this was like a commodity that you could be offering to your employers?
Yeah, it's well, I mean, so community as a, you know, being a community manager is something that at least luckily in the video game industry had been around for a long time. So I
Can you
was,
explain that?
yeah,
I have like,
totally.
dude, my like video gaming is like one of those things. Like, I want to play video games. I do. I wish I could. I have the attention, specifically with video game, and I guess any kind of games, but like I have the attention span of a gnat, like a bug, and I want to play them. They look so cool. They look so fun. I'm not that guy. So I'm
Yeah.
like, picture me ignorant here.
No, I think video game companies early on, and you know, they're still learning this every day, but I think they, at the core, they learned early on that um, if you have an audience and you build a tight, you know, relationship with that audience, or you build some sort of rapport, you can have some sort of recurring revenue business model built off of that audience, and they'll keep coming back, right? You have,
Mm-hmm.
you know, in the video game industry, you have sequelized franchises, right? So it makes sense to have build up some sort of audience and then build a relationship that you kind of maintain over time, so they come back and buy the second game and the third game or whatever, or buy the expansions or
Right.
whatever. And they're often, you know, in that sort of process, it's an iterative process, so you're typically trying, you know, hopefully you're making the product better each time, or maybe the product comes out and you're, you know, especially nowadays, it's, you're putting the product out and you're making it better all the time because you're able to update it. You don't have to worry about, you know, printing CDs or whatever. So pretty early on, I think game companies learned, especially with online games, they learned, you know, to have a forum, to have, you know, they were kind of on the forefront of social media, and they've kind of known a lot of the stuff that I see kind of software as a service tech companies kind of waking up and realizing that community management is all of a sudden important. Like the
Mm-hmm.
gaming industry knew that like 10 years ago. But it's
Yeah.
just kind of like everyone's just kind of, the hot, you know, moment right now, or one of the hot things in business right now, is recurring revenue models, right? The
Mm.
ability to have some sort of subscription revenue that you make off the same, you know, users on a recurring basis. And so as pretty much everyone in tech has moved in that direction,
Yep.
all of a sudden the importance of community is, you know, it's that much more important.
Absolutely. I think it's I mean, it makes total sense too that the gaming community is going to be there first. They're there. Right? They're already, they're already on the internet. Maybe the game isn't, a web-based game or whatever. Like that community is there, especially with like, the P2P and
Yeah,
that sort of stuff.
totally.
So it totally makes sense. And it's funny comparing it to the cannabis industry too. And I'd like to hear your perspective on this, just as a small tangent, but like,
Yeah,
I would say it's probably the opposite for the cannabis industry. Like, I mean, obviously, like you were able to recognize that and turn that into,
yeah,
cannabis, but like it's, I find myself constantly, and this is not a complaint. I find myself constantly educating people on the importance of things, our clients on the importance of, uh, I hate these techie buzzwords,
It's all
but of
good.
the community, right? Like
Yeah.
of facilitating your core group and speaking to them in a way that's, another terrible word, but engaging.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, I personally think there's a lot of room for improvement with respect to cannabis brands and like building community. I think right
Yeah.
now I think it's so early, and especially with the struggles with marketing and how to market in a way that won't get you permaban from Facebook or whatever. Like all these different things, I think mostly people are just focusing on what I would call is more actually just building an audience and building like a customer list or whatever. They're not actually building community.
Hmm.
I don't find, as someone who also buys a lot of cannabis, because I grow my own, but there's times where I don't have my own, so I go out and buy it. Hardly ever feel like some sort of communal experience when I go to a dispensary. It's just kind of in and out. There's not sort of any sort of like relationship building or really trying to kind of bring you into the fold and really try to bring you into this like experience that I'm trying to build. So that's something that I hope to see cannabis companies really improve on over the next year.
Same.
I think they're mostly just focused on building a brand and brand recognition, which I get.
Yep.
Like there's a lot of different brands out there and it's hard to differentiate and so on and so forth. But I think there's some interesting stuff out there. I like one of the brands that I like is
Hmm.
Brother David's,
Hmm.
which is distributed through Flow Kana, or at least it used to be. I think it still is. And they're from David Bronner from Dr. Bronner's. And
Right.
so, Brother David's, they've put a lot of they built their brand up around what they do with organic cannabis and where it comes from and their farmers, and they kind of tell this whole story. And I feel like I'm more a part of it, or I can contribute it, or I can buy a really cool sticker that I put on the back of my truck that says "End Prohibition" and cannabis prohibition now. They
Yep.
have these things that I can feel like I'm a part of, like a movement, and less like yeah, I just bought your $70 eighth, and I'll see you next week or whatever.
Totally. I think, and like that's a really good example of a company who has, incredibly vast experience outside of the cannabis industry, right? So unlike most of the, you know, customer personas, let's call it, of most of the customer personas that I'm talking to, very rarely do they have that kind of experience. And you're right, like they're focused on building the brand, not like, what happens now. Well, for sure you open the store, but also like have a barbecue, like, invite the neighborhood over, do whatever, like, have fun. Um, it's so important, yet it's just like, I'll see the light go off as if it were I was saying something incredibly, clever.
Yeah,
I'm
I mean,
not.
and oftentimes, I'll be honest, where a lot of my motivation and inspiration comes from is just tapping into like, what would I want?
Totally.
Honestly. And so when I come into the dispensary, it's just like, I want to feel like I'm a part of something, man. I'm buying fucking weed, man. This is cool. Like,
Yeah.
and we all love weed. And like in most places, period, you can't talk about weed anywhere, or
Yeah.
people are going to be like, what the hell are you talking about, man? I just know indica versus sativa or whatever. So I love, like, if we could, that's kind of what we're building with Cannabis, is like a space where you can have that discussion at least online and feel like you're a part of this thing.
I love that idea because like, you know, our company is for sure focused on that brand aspect. There's and the creative and digital implementation of that. There's 1,000 other spokes in that wheel, right? So like to me that makes total sense, just what you just said there, in that the way that these things all kind of coexist in order to ultimately get to something that's successful. But also I think most importantly is like the celebration of all of this, right? Weed is legal. Like I can walk into a store now, like whatever, like that's a celebration. And that's such an important part of normalization, which I think is, for sure part of our mission statement. I would assume, just being a user of your platform, that it's part of yours as well. But all of these things, like we just focused on the brand, the store's opened, like we're still, walking on eggshells or whatever. but it's not, it's a celebration. Like that's such a big part of the marketing aspect of it, I believe.
Yeah, and I think, I've seen this fight go down on a local level here in my city. They literally, city council just approved a dispensary on Monday, so just a couple of days ago. And
Yeah.
I called into all those city council meetings, arguing for them to approve it. And when you call into these things, like I said, I live in Northern California now. So you would think, we've had medical cannabis in California for what, like 15 years or something, 16 years. And you still have people being like, no, it's going to get the kids addicted to the marijuana or, whatever. And so we have to, it just showed me that there's so much more that we need to do as a collective cannabis community and industry to educate people and make people feel a part of it. So even if you don't, because you had people call in and be like, I'm not against marijuana, I just don't want this dispensary or whatever. We need to break down these misconceptions that they have or whatever, and just get them to see that as a cannabis industry and as a community, we're here and we're a great part of the larger community that we're a part of.
I totally agree. Yeah, I totally agree. I've been a fairly avid participant of, Weedstagram over the last few years, as a maker and devourer of content. It seems like every few months, someone will post some like whatever janky screenshot that's been reposted a million other times, and it's some screenshot of a letter saying that, Instagram's now shadow banning me, or Facebook's doing this, or I'm being shut down. There's a constant fear in the cannabis community, in the canna creator, community, that they'll be shut down, demonetized, kicked out, whatever. What's the big deal? What do you think these guys have against, I mean, aside from the obvious, which is maybe there's actual illegal drug dealing happening on these platforms, like, why can't I post a picture of the joint I'm smoking? I can post a picture of me like funneling a bottle of vodka.
Yeah, I think it's probably two things.
Don't do that, by the way, Sam. I just want to like put that out there. No, but disgusting. Even just thinking about it makes me want to like throw up a little bit.
Yeah. No, I feel you. Yeah. I think it's probably two things. I think it's one, kind of just more legal, like covering your ass sort of thing. They just don't want to really go down that rabbit hole and try to differentiate one thing or the other. And then kind of on that point too, I think it's also just operational. To have differentiated like cannabis rules based on region or country for that matter is operationally pretty heavy. I think they have Facebook, I think they have like 30 to 50,000 people that just work as moderators. So it's a pretty big operation to moderate Instagram and Facebook, for example, and to have like individual rules. Now, I pay quite a bit of attention to this stuff. So yeah, I did hear the guy who runs Instagram earlier this year talk about how they're probably going to eventually shift to rules that are specific to a region. So now that Canada is legalized, Mexico is about to legalize, right, and 30-something states have legalized here in the US, it wouldn't surprise me if at one point Facebook and Instagram, which again, Facebook owns Instagram, it wouldn't surprise me if they have some sort of like North American cannabis rules or something like that, where they do allow content. You're seeing a little bit of this, like literally just this week, Apple updated their app guidelines to allow cannabis sales through apps, which is pretty big, but it has to be legal cannabis. They differentiated that. So that was kind of interesting. You never saw the word cannabis
hadn't heard that
in their app rules up until Monday.
Was that was Federici up there on WWDC talking about weed selling weed on the iPhone?
No, you just have to be well, I mean, I think maybe The Verge might have included a mention of it, but I was literally the guy who like saw the new rules and did Control F through. I did Control F cannabis to see where it was mentioned.
That's interesting though.
Yeah, so that was an interesting change. And then also YouTube updated their guidelines not too long ago, maybe a couple months ago. And it seems like they are open to cannabis content, but it has to be educational. So like this podcast, for example, is fine. But if I were to like smoke a joint or a bong or something like that on camera, they don't like that. Or if you use like particular words, because I've noticed on the Cannabis YouTube account, they'll flag our content for like 18 and above if I use certain keywords in the name or
Right.
whatever. So I think they're kind of creeping towards it, but
Yeah,
really
that
what it
that
comes down to,
educational that
yeah,
educational thing, like there's been recent updates to like how paid advertising can work, and it's purely
yeah,
around like even cannabis companies, not just CBD companies, um, might be able to,
yeah,
as long as they're pushing educational resources, um, which is
yeah.
interesting.
I think it's like,
Google's opening up.
yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily easy to differentiate between someone who's like legitimately posting about cannabis and
Mm,
one who's like illegitimately.
exactly.
I can see it on Cannabis because it's like literally, if like the poster is from Cameroon or Nigeria, it's a scam pretty much like 100
Yeah.
times out of 100. And so I can get those really quickly. But if it was like someone from New York or Florida or whatever, it's very hard for me to kind of tell, is this legitimate or not legitimate or whatever. And so that's where I think like they're just kind of holding that back, because what I would imagine, you might get to a point where they have to have something like, I think Yelp or someone used to have this, where they would go out and like basically verify businesses. So they might have to
Yeah.
have a structure where they say the only cannabis accounts that are allowed on Facebook pages or whatever have to input their cannabis license or something, like, their business license ID.
Hmm.
I feel like that's going to happen eventually. But I don't think it's going to be like a free for all, because I think it's just, again, someone who runs a cannabis social network, it can be pretty hard to tell between what, and I've been doing it for a while. So if you just have some like random dude in Palo Alto, like trying to come up with their new cannabis content rules, I don't know if he's going to do a great job on it. There's a lot of nuance there.
Yeah, no, I can totally understand that. That the current approach, or the current restrictions, terms of service, whatever, of those companies, uh, I would assume led to the birth of your company.
Yeah, I mean, that was like it was the frustration of seeing a lot of cannabis content being taken down. So in 2018 is when I saw a big batch of content being taken down on YouTube and
I
on
remember.
Instagram. Yeah. So actually, I got Leafly to write about that. So if you Google like Leafly Sam Houston or something like that, you'll find an article that they wrote in April of 2018, which was about when YouTube started taking down content. And I was quoted in the first line, and it was because I emailed Leafly and I was like, "Hey, my favorite YouTubers and whatever are being taken down, and no one's talking about it. Like, someone needs to talk about this." So Leafly wrote about it, and then I started to see some other people starting to talk about cannabis content being taken down. And at the time, I was hoping that, foolishly, that we'd raise some noise and maybe Facebook and Twitter would be like, "Oh, wait a minute, we literally just legalized cannabis in California. We can change our
Yeah,
rules."
but no.
But no. So so yeah, basically fast forward a year later, and I'll save you the long story, but basically I had started to think
I
about
love the
this
long
thing.
story. Don't save us
Okay.
the long story.
Okay.
I was
Well,
born in Ohio.
yeah. No, well, so for me, that started the gears turning, which was
Yeah.
like, there needs to be something, and Instagram and YouTube are not doing this right. And for me, I was spending most of my time in terms of daily interactions or whatever, it was more on Instagram. So I was really
Sure.
kind of especially focused on that kind of use case. And so I was really frustrated by that. And then at the end of 2018, I went to the Emerald Cup in Santa Rosa,
Hmm.
Northern California. And I met another guy that I knew online through Instagram, and he got talking to me. And he hit me up after the Emerald Cup, and he was like, "Hey, my username is Q Grows, so people call me Q or Q Grows." And I think he was like, "Hey, Q, like, what do you think about starting a social network?" And this is a person, his name is JR Token. He's just a guy who grows, and he's a medical patient. He doesn't know anything about social media and tech. He was literally just a guy that was like, "You seem like someone who knows about this. Like, what would it take to start a social network?" And I pretty much told him, like, it's really hard to do and really expensive to do, because again, I've worked for venture backed companies. The last startup that I worked for, I think, has raised like $80 million so far. I worked for Secret in 2014, and they raised like $35 million in the first like 6 months. And if you look at Clubhouse right now, they've raised over $1 billion. And it looks like, Twitter and Facebook are probably going to eat their lunch. Like, it's a very competitive market. And usually the expectation of venture capital is like, you have to raise a ton of money because you need to build a really great product really quick and then get a ton of users on it, and then kind of get to some sort of scale and then figure out a business model or whatever. Right. And that wasn't something that I didn't think was really going to work with cannabis social media. And maybe, I don't know if you're going to bring this up, but I've seen other people try that and it didn't work. Namely Mass Roots is what I've called out on my Instagram account.
I've seen it. It's on my notes.
Yeah. So I've seen other people try and it hasn't worked out. And so I wanted to figure out a different path. And so, serendipitously.
Let's talk about this real quick, because there were and there are a couple cannabis social media platforms, but as I'm thinking about it, and maybe it's just because my exposure to multiple, obviously there's probably there's Twitch, so that's for gaming, but I can't think of specific cultural. I mean, I guess maybe SoundCloud, for music, but there's
it's very hard.
There's not these culturally specific social media platforms. So aside from like seeing your personal frustrations with how you engaged with social media and content, like what I mean, you were seeing Mass Roots, I'm sure you were seeing what Leafwire was doing, and this guy was like, hey, what do you do? At what point are you like, like the solution is so simple?
Well, it was, that person.
I know it's not, and by the way, I know it's not simple, but like just being like, oh fuck, I'll do it.
Well, it was more like, I was thinking about it for a while, but I thought it couldn't happen, right? Because I was working, full time at the startup that I was at, and I'm not independently wealthy enough, and I also didn't really want to have to go down the venture capital path and really try to build your own platform, because really to build your own platform like that would cost, I'd say, at least $500,000 to $2 million just to get started, because each one engineer in the Bay Area is 150 to like 200 grand, just in salary. So it's like those things kind of add up, and that's a lot. So it was that person reaching out kind of got me thinking. And then it was serendipitously seeing a friend of mine. He runs a company out of Boston that builds the social network platform as a service. So that's my friend, Sean, who I worked with actually out in Boston 13 years ago at that startup. He now runs a startup in Boston, and they built this, software as a service social network platform.
White labeling a social media platform.
Yeah, exactly. They originally built it for Lady Gaga, and I basically just change out some logos and some colors and here and there, and you can have your own social network. And so it was me ultimately teaming up with Sean, or Sean enabling us really with his platform that enabled us to launch CannaBuzz. So between talking to Sean and launching was only a couple months, where if I would have, let's say, decided at the end of 2019, I want to raise money and build a social network. Yeah, I'd still be building it today, probably.
For sure. I mean, that's interesting too. I'd be interested to hear a little bit more about the bootstrap, because like, just for people who have whatever trepidations, not only about being entrepreneurial, but maybe being entrepreneurial in the cannabis industry, I think it's important to realize, like, this doesn't have to be an overnight thing. You can build, like, the good things take time to build, but you can bootstrap it. You can find inexpensive ways to get things done. I had this really interesting conversation with Alexandra Fasulo, who's like, she's getting blown up right now. She's the queen of Fiverr, right? So like all she does is freelance, and she like crushes it on Fiverr. She like absolutely murders on Fiverr. But she, all she did was just open up her computer and start doing what she does, and like
Yeah.
she's been able to do it inexpensively. And I think like there's ways to build companies without going out and raising, $250,000 to $5 million, whatever. Like,
Yeah.
it's slow. It, will make you anxious
Yeah.
and help you go a little bald. You can't see from this camera angle, but it's shiny up
It's
there.
there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's for sure shiny up there.
Yeah, no,
But
I
like that
feel
idea
you.
of
Yeah.
bootstrapping, like there's solutions out there that you can turn into your own.
Yeah, that's what it's definitely my chosen path. And I definitely have moments where I'm like, should I go do this that way, or because like, being able to build your own thing, there's a lot of benefits to that too. There's you have a lot more control. You can decide what comes out, what features get added or whatever, where being just a customer for a software as a service platform, you're just kind of along for the ride along with everyone else, right? So that is the downside. But thankfully, here we are 2021. There's a lot of different platforms, whether it's like payments or websites or whatever. All this stuff now, you can typically pay like 25-30 bucks a month in some cases, just to get things off the ground. You don't have to, where 15 years ago would have cost thousands and thousands of dollars. So that for me has been really helpful, because again, like, I wasn't a person that had a lot of money to work with. So it was a big investment to go onto LegalZoom and file for the trademark
Yeah, I
and go through
totally
all that.
get, I
Yeah.
totally get that. You're like, oh
Yeah.
my God, it's $50.
Well, it's like, holy shit, I got to do all these things. It's going to be 700 bucks. And I got to,
I
mail
remember I
some.
was
Yeah.
like debating the $15 a month, Adobe DocuSign fee. And of course,
Yeah.
our contracts are worth thousands of dollars. All I have to do is sell one and it's like covered for 5 years or whatever. And I'm
Yeah.
like, I don't know. I don't think I could do $15 a month.
Yeah.
But like,
Yeah.
you do what you do. You got to do. You figure out what the return on a project is, and you do a little bit of math.
Yeah.
So take me back to this like frustration. You
Sure.
meet Sean,
Yeah.
JR Token tells you, let's do this. I assume
Yeah.
he's a financial component to he's your co-founder.
Well, he's more of just, I would say I go to JR more as like a person to bounce ideas off of, and someone who helps keep
The
me
man
rooted.
wrote the Lord of the Rings, for God's sake. He's got to be pretty smart.
He delivered the Silmarillion. No, he no, what I do is I touch base with him and help, because he's a medical patient and he's been growing cannabis for a really long time. I'm pretty new to the cannabis scene and really using it on a daily basis. I started really using cannabis a lot more once we legalized it here in California.
Sure.
And so for me, I love being able to touch base with JR and be like, like right now where I'm working together with him on an edibles live stream, and I don't know about, all the different types of concentrates that you can make and all this sort of stuff. So he helps me kind of connect those dots. And that was really helpful, especially when we launched Cannabis, because our core audience at the beginning was cannabis growers, people that grow cannabis at home.
Right.
And so it was really helpful to have JR Token there, because he's been on Instagram growing weed for a while. So he had all these connections that he could pull in, and we could get onto YouTube shows. And it just, I had a little bit of credibility in the community because I was online making a little bit of ruckus, and I could grow weed that kind of looked good, but that was about it. But and I have like a decent personality, I guess. But it was JR Token that was able to like be that credibility, especially in the beginning. That's something that I would say for pretty much anyone, but especially with respect to engaging with communities. In the beginning, you need to establish your credibility and establish with people like that you really genuinely care, that I'm not just setting up a website for you to post your weed stuff on, and that data might get sold to whomever or whatever this, whatever. I needed to be able to answer those sorts of questions and be able to credibly stand behind those answers. And having someone like JR, and then also having like the story that I had and kind of the way that we approached it, it helped us have that legitimacy, and it helped us have that kind of core community when we first launched. Because otherwise it would have just been like the 50 people that I emailed when we launched. and wouldn't have gone much further than that. But it was like that core group that we kind of knew each other, and they could invite friends, and we could get onto podcasts and so on and so forth.
It's the network. And I like
Yeah.
that co-founder relationship. I talk about it often. Like for a lot of solo entrepreneurs, like a lot of times the reason for failure is because they don't recognize the weakness or the, the left hand, right hand value proposition, right? Like there needs to be balance, right?
Yeah.
And it's hard to find the right people to do that. Obviously, like it's like, a marriage or putting together a perfect band, it's like, it's very difficult to do. And sometimes, people make the wrong choice, but I think like in finding that co-founder, you have to recognize like, okay, I, I need to be inspired. I need to inspire. I need to get this shit done, but also like I'll rely on you to get these things done, and trust in you to get these things done because like let's go, right? And especially
Yeah.
with tech, because it's like, I mean, I can't even. There's no analogy for the speed of evolution in tech. Like evolution isn't even the right word because evolution, is talking about evolution, right? Like,
Yeah.
which took billions of years, hundreds of millions of years, right? Like tech evolution is something so much faster and exponentially, like, just anyway.
Yeah.
So being able to get an MVP to market is crazy impressive because by the time you do it, the likelihood of you being obsolete is great.
Yeah. That's why, again, with these sorts of services, it helped me at least, test the idea out and fail cheaply, because ultimately if this thing doesn't work out or turn into, a big thing, that's not ending for me or whatever.
Sure.
It's been a great basically a side project that I do in addition to my other work. But it's given me a great outlet as well. And back to with JR and the kind of co-founder thing, for me it was like I knew I was missing some things and I needed some help there. And frankly, I talk to my wife a lot and bounce ideas off of her.
Yeah.
And I think what I'm trying to become better at just in general is like trying to figure out what are people's strengths and how can I like bring them part in the process. Cause I often kind of just like heads down and just focus on it and feel like I have to do everything.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of been one of the things that I think I've been kind of learning and need to continue to learn.
Yeah. Well, I used to do that with my wife way more than I do now because now my wife works for CannaPlanners. Right. So like all we do is talk about problems, solutions, and things like that.
Yeah.
But I think what you're getting at is like, in addition to relying on the expertise of your employees or your team or whatever, like
Yeah.
you have to pop your bubble all the time. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what's been really cool because, like, for me, with Cannabis and how we've set up Cannabis, one plus side is I don't have to spend a ton of time focusing on the technical problems per se. I spend a lot of times like, how can we build up the community and make the community more engaging? And that's where, again, I love like talking to other people because we have so many different inspirations. And that's where, I can talk to my wife and hear how she uses YouTube or TikTok or Patreon or whatever. And we can kind of throw around ideas and like, oh, have you checked out this creator? They do something really cool, or whatever. And that has been, I like that. So yeah, I've enjoyed, I'm a creative person. And one of the things I love most about what I do is just trying to come up with like creative solutions to problems and how to like match that with what people want or what they seem to be telling us they want or whatever. I love just kind of trying to figure out that puzzle.
What works.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's been a lot of fun in the last like year or so. I've been really kind of focusing on that, especially in the last, this year, especially.
You've been vocal about Mass Roots. and if I've been so checked out of that company for years, I didn't even know they were still around. But if I recall correctly, and I only know it because I saw your post on it, was they've turned into a recycling company. They're diversifying essentially, but
Yeah.
diversifying so outside of the original intent, it's just comical.
Yeah.
Um, so there's that, and then there's I I go on. I mean, there's a site called LeafWire, and I don't know why I even use it because the engagement rate is just like it's just boring, is what it is. I'm curious, like what opportunities you take from like the and I don't even want to call them competitors because not only are you doing something different,
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think
they're
they're,
they're they're colleagues, let's call them. Like what opportunities are they showing as cannabis on the internet matures?
I think, yeah, it's been really interesting. There's a lot of different, there's a ton, and I pay a decent amount of attention to a lot of them. I have them, on my phone, and I'll open up the app every once in a while or whatever it is to try to figure out like how it's doing, how many people are on it or whatever. I try to keep tabs on that kind of stuff. But yeah, there's been all sorts of things. There was Burner, the guy, founder of Cookies. He had his app called Social Club
All right.
that lasted for a few months before it got taken down from the app stores. There's been a lot of different things. I guess, I think some of the things that there's some of it's like the designs of the apps and kind of, I think users really have come to expect some sort of like Instagram like experience in terms of your feed. And it's amazing to me how people's expectations in the app world in terms of speaking about tech, people have really high expectations when it comes to apps. It's crazy, especially because if you're used to using Instagram all day, there are 1,500 people, I think, that work on Instagram. And I think it makes like $15 billion a year or something. It makes like crazy amounts of money,
Right.
So there are a lot of resources that go into that app, and there's a reason why it works really freaking good. It's also been around for like 10 years.
Right.
So it's had time. So it's really hard to stack up against that, and down to like people expecting, I want to double tap to like, I shouldn't have to do this or whatever, people have those sorts of expectations. So I think that's really challenging. So you have that. If your app is clunky and whatever, in our app, frankly has room to grow there and get a little bit easier to use. So those things are kind of a barrier in and of itself. And then on top of that, if that kind of core interaction isn't quite working, like some of them have tried to focus on dating. Some of them have tried to focus on the idea that like you're looking for other people to smoke weed with. So you want to like open up the app and find people locally to go smoke a joint with or something. There's some ideas like,
I would never do that. Would you?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah,
Like never. No.
Yeah, I don't think it's really. Yeah, so I think people are kind of missing on some of the core concepts or the core interactions. There was Doobie was another cannabis social network. It had a really weird like kind of Tinder interaction where you swiped right and swiped left on like random content that would come in front of you. So I think people kind of made missteps in terms of the core interactions. And then the real thing there is that they didn't build a community, and they don't, and that's hard to do. Like we're 2 years into it, and I think now we kind of really have like a really tight, good core to our community, but it took time to get there and happy accidents along the way. But a lot of that is like just me and others interacting a lot in the community. We have the Cannabis account, we have my account, we have JR that posts as well, and we're always contributing. And then in the Cannabis app, I feature people in the community throughout the day so that content is seen by everyone in the community at the very top of the app. So that's part of me, again, also trying to spotlight cool stuff happening in the app and basically trying to inspire people. People mimic what's popular. You see this on TikTok all the time. If there's a popular TikTok, everyone makes a TikTok, about it, like in that same style. Man. Yeah, the biggest one this week was Adult Swim. They had a really cool like thing that was going viral on TikTok. But anyways, the point of that story is that people mimic each other. So what I'm doing by featuring cool content on Cannabis is I'm trying to basically teach my community that this is cool shit, and try to mimic it. Like, try to post cool pictures, try to post something that's inspiring, try to be nice and polite to people, and welcoming to each other. All these sorts of things I'm teaching to the community through my own actions, through moderation, through banning people when they act out. Like, all these sorts of things are part of the community, building the community. And I think that's where people make mistakes. That's ultimately why Social Club got taken off the internet, is because they weren't moderating their content, and they got kind of like taken over by like porn and all kinds of stuff that was coming over from 4chan to Social Club. And that kind of goes back to, again, kind of the core, how you position yourself in the market. You have to kind of figure out, how do I position myself? And with that position, or with that positioning and messaging, what community does that attract? Right? With Social Club, their tagline in the app was something like, it was like the open social network, or where anything goes kind of thing. It was, and that's going to attract certain people. It's like, if the people that are getting kicked off of 7chan and 4chan and 9chan and all this other crap, they're going to go over there. And so anyways, those are the sorts of things that I'm really mindful of as a community person. I have community guidelines. I moderate we moderate things when they happen or pop up. Sure. Those are sorts of things I think that are also, key to our success.
Take me to the day before you launched Cannabis. How was that?
Well, I think, when we're getting ready to launch, and even still in those first few months, it was like just hoping that we could get the app approved.
Yeah.
And that it would
please, App Store.
Yeah, like that it would sneak through. And frankly, it's still kind of like that when we have updates, because we get flagged every once in a while for stuff and have to like negotiate or whatever, talk to them about what's going on. So yeah, I think that was the biggest concern. And then beyond that, it's like, is this thing going to work? Because I'm just a person, and I have these interests and whatever, but like, does anyone else give a shit? And it's really hard to come like back to what I was just saying earlier in terms of positioning. Like, people, if you position yourself as, hey guys, Instagram sucks, come over here because you can post all your content, that works to a certain extent. But also, there's like 1.5 billion people or whatever it is on Instagram. People can reach really huge audiences. So that's one of the things that I really learned as well, especially in the last 6 months, is kind of pivoting a little bit away from that language, because people get really kind of bummed out.
You're not a replacement for Instagram. You're not a replacement for you're something different.
But we try to want to be
specific.
Yeah, exactly. I found that, that kind of sweet spot is for people that recognize that they want to be a part of a community, and it's not just like, a network to get a huge following on. So that's been a little bit of a shift, and it's taken time there. And, frankly, a lot of people have found that Cannabis isn't for them because we aren't those things. And I've had to kind of learn my limitations there too, because I kind of would get upset about that, and wondering if I need to do this, that, or the other thing. But
totally, you're reading the comments, dude. Never read the comments. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I get it. It's for sure that moment when and this is only, and I don't want to say this as like a generality, it's not a total general statement, blanket general statement, but like my tendency to be emotional about things like that. A client decides to, get a website somewhere else, or they don't want to do SEO, whatever it is. Like, there was a point where I'd like be fighting myself or like crying in the shower or whatever. And like that moment where, you can separate some of that emotion. You never will be able to do it totally, but like for things like that, it's just like so relieving. It's just such a nice step. It's also like an emotional scale. You talk about like business scale. It's like an emotional scale. Okay. Like, I don't need to worry about that thing anymore. I now need to worry about these things.
Exactly. Yeah. I've stopped kind of worrying as much about like, because I used to keep track of all those competitors and really like be upset and like, checking the app rankings and worry like, oh great, there's another, that's going to hurt us or something. And I've just kind of seen as more if I just like focus on cannabis
Yes.
and focus on the community, that is much more productive and actually does something, rather than like being worried about what these other people are going to do.
Hugely important point to anybody. Sam, what you just said is so important. Like, paying attention to your competition is one thing. Obsessing over them is a totally different thing. Like,
Yeah.
however much attention you're spending on, checking out what your competitors are doing, remove it all. Remove it. Maybe just like look with one eye. But it's such an important thing, because you'll kill yourself being like, oh my God. And especially like viewing people through the lens of social media,
Yeah.
which is total bullshit. Like,
Yeah.
I can make a user think that we're, just launched the biggest, most, craziest project, but really it wasn't that at all. Like, that's the magic of social media. Like,
Yeah, exactly. I've gone through that roller coaster, because I'll watch people and I'll see them like, guys, we got this really crazy announcement coming up, and I'm like, oh shit, it's gonna happen. Like, I'm fucked or something, and then it happens, and I'm like, that was it? Like, really?
Totally.
And so I've gone through that. I put myself through that.
It's impossible to avoid it. It's impossible to avoid it. But like, you're right, to your point. Like, you will yield actual success should you take that time and focus it on like doing your thing, because of those competitors who've popped up in the App Store, and Mass Roots is one of them. You're still here, baby. You're still doing your thing. I love it. To what you were talking about before, like, and he's come up a couple times, and I hate myself for bringing him up so many times, but Gary V has one of these Gary V isms is like, everybody isn't your customer. Like, we'd like to have 1 billion users on Cannabis. Wouldn't that be great? But really, like, focusing on that core group, and through community management, right? Through actually engaging within the community you're building, which I would guarantee you 1,000% Burner was not doing. Burner's not on his social media platform, like flagging comments, He's got other, so like that stuff is important in growing it, but like it provides more value to the people who actually are taking it seriously. Right.
Yeah. And that's what, what's been really most satisfying is hearing people and seeing people like say our values back to us, basically. And what I mean by that is like, and you see this in other businesses, but with Cannabis is the example. When someone says to you like, oh, I feel like this is such a welcoming place, and I've met so many great people, and blah, 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 like all this stuff that I want to accomplish with Cannabis, people are saying back to us. That's rad. And I know that I had a part of that, but what makes me especially proud is that I've somehow like influenced other people to help me do that in the community, right? Because I can do it. Like you said, I can comment and I can do this, that, and the other thing. But at the end of the day, there's thousands of people, like you mentioned at the top, there's over 120 something thousand people on Cannabis. It's going to take other people in the community kind of reflecting our values, and that really the vibe, basically, how they can create that vibe. And so that has been really gratifying, and seeing people like, one of the things that's important to us at Cannabis is making sure that it's a welcoming place, that it's not a place that's gatekeeping you one way or the other. So like, whether it's like, we have growers, the growers need to accept that there's people that just smoke weed or they do dabs or whatever. And just the same with like grower communities. If you get really deep into the weed growing community, especially on Instagram, it's pretty negative, loves to judge each other. And
I was gonna say this. I'm glad you're saying it, because I was just about to like be like, you know what? Like, that's a really huge challenge in this community, which is like, overwhelmingly negative.
It loves to
online.
Totally. It's a place where, at least a portion of it loves calling people out on shit, and I've done it. But we don't want that to be the core of what cannabis is. We want people to be inspiring to each other. And if you chose to grow weed one way, that doesn't mean that everyone's an idiot for growing it another way, or whatever the situation is. Or if you just post videos of you smoking bongs, that doesn't mean you suck because you've never grown a plant in your life, And those are, I'm basically quoting shit that's come up in our community, by the way. And it takes us going in there and telling that person, like, you're wrong. I'm sorry, you're wrong. And if you have that opinion, like, you're not, it's like probably not going to work out on cannabis. And I, not to say that I like go in and ban them right away or anything like that. It's more just like,
it's just not what this place is about. We're not about that here.
Yeah, exactly. And what's been cool is like, it does suck, especially when some people, they might have been around for 2 years and they knew that, they knew us when cannabis was like literally just scrolling for days and you could see plants. But now that it's not just plants, it's people talking about mental health or whatever the situation, whatever the aspect of cannabis that they're passionate about. Some of our community members don't like that. And that is a bummer to see them go away. But I'm also, I guess what makes me feel good is that we also get a lot of new people in that have that interest, but also other interests, and we can create like this overall place. And kind of like what you were saying earlier, I can't lose too much sleep about seeing some of those people, even if I recognize their username or whatever, and you see like, oh, it's a bummer to see them go away. But it's kind of like that with everything, if whether it's a podcast that you're really into or a YouTube show or whatever, you just kind of like fall off after a while.
I mean, that has to be especially exponentially more greater. Like, it's so much more true with a new social media platform. Like, first of all, getting that initial user base to a point where, it actually matters is one thing. And then, you brought up Clubhouse, which I've used, I don't know, 10 times. And I was like, I was a beta user on it. But like the thing about Clubhouse is like, it's that wave and then immediate attrition. Like everybody comes in, they check it out. They're like, oh, what is this? I'm out of here.
Yeah, exactly.
Back to Instagram.
Yeah, we had that experience, we did a live stream in the mid to end December. And I remember it because we announced on the live stream, it was like our Christmas special that we did with another cannabis breeder podcast guy. His name is Rasta Jeff. He does the Grow From Your Heart podcast, if anyone out there knows it. So we were doing a thing with him, and I announced on the show we have 37,000 people. And I was pretty stoked because we started 2020, I think with about 15,000. So we'd grown organically by 22,000 people. But by the first week of January, so basically like 3 weeks or whatever that is, we had grown to well over 100,000 people. We grew by 60, 70,000 people in the span of a week or so. And the bulk of that was within a couple of days. There was one day, I think it was the 22nd of December, that we gained like 16,000 people in a day.
That's amazing.
It was because of one of those memes like you were talking about earlier, where basically Instagram changed their terms of service on December 20th or whatever. And people were like, Instagram's gonna, yeah, exactly. And so that we went like mini viral with some influencers. Yeah, with some influencers. And that was really cool. We had basically to kind of, since I'm on a marketing business podcast, to deconstruct what happened.
Bring it on, baby. Lay it on thick.
Basically what happened is it was kind of this groundswell moment where you had we've been in the community for a while now, so people know of cannabis. So once someone gets banned or something like that, once they get you see someone saying, oh, I got my shit taken down on Instagram, eventually you might see someone post in the comments like, oh, you should go check out Cannabis. So that's kind of like what set us up to have the moment that we had. Mm-hmm. And so basically that stuff started going viral. Instagram changed its terms of service. People were mentioning this. And then at some point, those sorts of comments were happening with influencers. So at some point, on the 20th or whatever it was, Koala Puffs in particular woke up and she posted on her Instagram, like, I'm hearing this thing about cannabis. Like, what is it? Should I join or something like that? And a bunch of people, commented on the story like, yeah, you should join it or something. And so she posted about it, and at the time, she had two other influencers that lived with her in LA. And so they joined. And so all of a sudden I have three big influencers that have a collective, like, 500 something thousand followers. And so that basically convinced a few other influencers that they needed to join as well. And so in those few days, they were all posting about it. And I was keeping that going by also interacting with them from the Cannabis account. So I would like repost their stuff on Instagram, Cannabis, or the Cannabis Instagram, because I realized, and I don't mean this in a negative way towards these people, but they love attention and they love affirmation. And since I don't have money to give them, I could at least give them like exposure and excitement and make them feel like they're a part of this thing.
Yeah, totally.
So when they would post content, I would repost it. When they would come over to Cannabis and post something, I would feature it. So, when Koala Puffs posted about it on her profile, all the people come over and they would see Koala Puffs post featured right at the top of the app. And so it kind of helped create this little cycle there that lasted for, a handful of days. But then, ultimately we did go through that cycle that you're describing, which is, we had, 70,000 people sign up, and most of them don't use the app anymore. But we are, bigger today than we were in November, big wave. We do have,
absolutely,
more of an audience. And what I've had to do is really kind of figure out, how can we take in these new people? Like, one of the best things that happened in that moment is it made our community way more diverse. We were much more like dudes growing weed, basically. Yeah. And now we're way more diverse. We have way more women in the community, way more people that would love to just smoke weed out of cool looking bogs and posting videos and whatever. And so that's been really cool. That enabled me to like expand the scope of what we're doing and how I think about it, and think about, how are there more and more ways that I can bring in more members of this community and give them the spotlight? And because then you see that lights up other parts of your community, because those people that are quiet, they see like, oh, there's this other person that does this thing, and they want to go seek that out. And that's another thing that I would suggest, with anyone that's kind of building a community, is like, maybe you can find those little things that you can kind of just put a little fuel on it, and it might blossom into, another kind of little group in your community, so to speak, a little niche.
I still like, I'm just thinking about the idea of like how, the cultivation, right? Like, I think one of the things that you can, very easily see is, given that, Instagram's been around for however, Facebook's been around since 2003 or whatever. And, all these companies have very rich histories, like so much has happened. And you can see kind of where scale happened. And, how many people are going on to Instagram or Facebook and are feeling good about themselves, like Facebook allegedly, impacted election, like there's all these like, just like horrible things happening on social media to these companies who are, unmanageable basically, right? Beyond, aside from an algorithm, right? Like it's impossible. You just said there's 50,000 people or whatever just monitoring Facebook. Like that's insane to me. You can cultivate it more. You can grow this more. Like this is a, like it's that Black Panther meme of we don't do that here, and like being very vocal about it. And I think that's awesome. I hope that, so I'm curious, like, because as you said, like Cannabis is, full-time, but really part-time. You have a gig in addition to what you're doing, which, dude, respect. I do not miss those days of, the ultimate grind, like coming home after work and then having to go to work. So respect, like, at what point, how do you gauge success with Cannabis? And at what point, I mean, do you think that this will ultimately always just be a part-time thing for you? Or, and I don't want to imply that you're spending, a set amount of time on it, but is it going to be your side hustle? Is there a monetization goals? Like, what do you, what's your plan?
Sure. Yeah. So the business model, like I've tried advertising, and maybe this is a good conversation to us to have out of the podcast, because I frankly would love to tap into your knowledge here. But I found as like a little niche social network that it's been hard for me to get dollars and any sort of like meaningful numbers from people, because also we're not tapped into these big like influencer networks or whatever. We're not kind of like reselling
Events.
relationships with influencers or whatever. We basically just have cannabis, right? And so you have to be down with like the niche and the kind of small niche that it is. So with that all said, I kind of found it was pretty difficult to sell ads, more than $150 ads at a time or whatever, which is not going to build a sustainable business. So, so for what we've shifted to now, and been able to do through the platform, is we turned on a membership model that is pretty similar to a Patreon or something similar, where we have Cannabis itself is free, but we have two other tiers. We have one that's an $8 a month tier, and the other one that's a $20 a month tier. And the $8 a month tier is kind of more similar to just like, hey, you're helping contribute some money to help Cannabis, and you're helping us create more content. And we also have some groups that are like members only, but I would say a lot of the value there is like people that just want to help contribute.
Yeah.
And then the $19.99 a month tier is working towards every year sending out like a swag box. So actually this shirt that I have is one of the
oh, it's dope.
Yeah. It says
Totally
higher
cool.
being.
It's cool.
So, that was actually, we just launched membership in May, we launched it on 4/20. So our year was at the end of May, or month was at the end of May. But yeah, we launched on 4/20, and I used that first month's of money to actually hire the designer to do this t-shirt. So that's been cool to use the money. Like now that I can basically cover the bills to keep the lights on and not have it just come out of my personal credit card every month. And have some additional money left over, I can kind of invest in some of these things. And my goal there is, I'd love, to have, thousands of paid subscribers. Right now, we're hovering at the 100 person mark.
You gotta start somewhere, man. That's a great start.
So that's been exciting. And if you look at other subscription businesses like Substack or Patreon or whatever, typically the conversion rates for audiences is about 1 to 2 to 3% if you're really good at what you do. So, we're a long way from even that 1% mark. But if I could get to a 1 or 2% mark, that would be pretty decent. That would be enough to sustain at least myself. So that's something that I would love to happen someday. I'm a little limited on my ability to kind of like speed up that process, I guess.
Sure.
But yeah, so I'm kind of looking at it. I've kind of shifted from my previous mindsets to really thinking about what we're doing as more of like content creation and community building. So it's a little bit of like the stuff that I've watched your show before and tried to take some inspiration from it and other cannabis content creators out there. I want to kind of learn from them and use those platforms to put our content out there and basically tap into our community as well to also create that content. Like we're going to do a live stream later this month, and that will be members from our community that make edibles. We're kind of putting them on the spotlight and talking to them about how they do what they do. So that's been cool. I can, it helps me make the community excited because they see some of their own up there on the community. It makes those individuals excited. The people that are watching get to learn something and get value out of that. It creates this whole kind of like virtuous cycle over there. And then I'm trying to use kind of content as a potential way to reach a broader audience, So I put up videos, I've done a little bit of clickbaity stuff. I went up and bought the, what is this? This is, I just spaced on his name, Seth Rogen. I went and bought Seth Rogen's weed.
I can't remember what it's called.
Houseplant.
Yeah.
So I bought,
I was gonna say coffee shop. Nope. Houseplant.
Yeah. So I bought Houseplant down in Berkeley. I live in, like I said, NorCal. So I went down to Berkeley and bought some Houseplant and posted up like a review video on our YouTube. So I tried to do some things there to kind of build an audience. But So that's kind of where we're at now. We're a pretty small business.
It's
Love to
it's
kind of build it
you're
into
trying to
something.
like get the mixture, that middle ground of, Patreon, but Patreon as the platform supporting the content creators as opposed to kind of the other way around.
Well, it's like it's kind of an interesting concept or whatever. It's a new thing for people because most people are just used to subscribing to individual creators,
Right.
and that's something that I've had to kind of think about too. Is like if I focus too much on like, hey, if you subscribe, I'm going to create way more content. That kind of shifts my focus as well. So we're trying to kind of, at least for now, figure out if we can kind of have a little bit of a mix of both, which is like you're contributing money to help this community and help make this community possible and help it do really cool stuff. And then also that helps us like create more content, or like, what we've been doing the last couple of weeks is every Tuesday and Thursday at 4 o'clock, we do Zoom hangouts that the community can join. And so that's been a really cool way, especially, during COVID, for people to just hang out and have a space to meet others. It's not finding someone in my local area to smoke a joint with, but it's finding people online that I can smoke a joint with. And that has been really cool too.
Way safer.
So yeah, exactly. So, I think for now, that's kind of the focus, and we'll see if things change. I mean, we are in a time right now where community and, software as a service based businesses and all these things are happening right now. And they're
Yep.
making something like this possible where, it wasn't possible before. But now we're getting to a point where me as a community person, because I'll be frank, like, I'm not stoked about all the companies that I've worked for. You become less stoked for them over time. What I'm really passionate about is community building and really caring about the community that I work for, and all these other things. So that's where, focusing on community, having this sort of revenue model that is like community supported has been more fulfilling and more exciting than other models. And so, yeah, I'm kind of going through that active process, to be 100% honest with you. Is like, I have a recruiter that reached out to me from a venture capital firm earlier this week, and so I'll have a call with them tomorrow. And I've been kind of having this fight in my head of like, do you just focus all your time on Cannabis, or do you go find another job or whatever? Because I've been contracting for the last year.
You'll know, dude. Let me just tell
Yeah,
you, you'll know exactly when the time is right because, and I don't mean to sound like a weed industry dude, and this is gonna
yeah,
sound like weed industry hippie shit, but like the universe has a way of telling you, like there will be a time and you'll be like, oh, that is let's go.
yeah, exactly,
For
totally,
me, it was getting fired.
yeah,
Like I was having the same sort of thing and the universe delivered. It's like it pushed me, like
yeah.
literally right out the door.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, that kind of actually happened to me at the startup that I was at right before the pandemic. And that pushed me into the situation I'm in now, where I'm working as a contractor during COVID. And that has actually been helpful because it allows me to create more in my schedule and dabble more with cannabis and spend that mental energy without feeling like I'm like cheating on my other like
Yeah.
spouse or whatever, you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
So it's just like, yeah. So I've been kind of
You're
enjoying that and kind of
yeah.
and just going through that experience.
Well, Sam, your passion is abundantly clear. I wish you the best of luck with it. I can't wait to see what you do with it. I am very thankful that you took the time to talk to us today. And would you tell the people where to find you? We'll link it all
Sure.
below in the description. And I'm pointing down for those listening.
I appreciate everyone's time. I know we've talked for quite a long time. I can talk for a while, as you can
We'll do
tell.
this
So
again. Once
yeah,
once you take the company, public, we're gonna do this again. I'm gonna call in
yeah,
an old favor.
round two. No, I appreciate it. So yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone for their time and just listening to me chat and
We
kind of
appreciate
share
you,
a little
man.
bit of what I've learned. So you can find Cannabis at cannabuzz.app. Or if you search Cannabis in the app stores, you will probably find us. So if you search in the App Store, Google Play Store, you'll find the app. You can follow myself on Twitter. I'm at Sam Houston. That's where I tweet about whatever is going on. And then for more of my cannabis or cannabis life, you can find me under Q Grows. So that's just the letter Q and Grows. So you'll find me I'm growing plants in my backyard this year. So you'll see a lot of little pictures of that right now.
Any particular strain that you're excited about?
Sure. So I just got clones from a couple different places out here in California. So I have a clone or two clones of Forbidden Runts, which is going to be interesting. That's Forbidden Skittles times Runts. And I'm a big Forbidden Fruit fan, huge fan of that. So I'm excited about that. And then I also have two clones of Chocolate Tonic CBD, which is supposed to be like a 2-to-1 CBD plant. So I'm excited about that because I love making CBD things for my family and my dogs, as you can see one behind me.
You're the second guest. I didn't get a chance to ask any questions of your dog. Sam Houston, co-founder and CEO of CannaBuzz. We appreciate you, man. It's been interesting hearing about your journey. And again, I can't wait to see where you take this thing. We will be back next time with somebody else. I don't know who, but thanks for tuning in. Talk to you later.